Started live. We are recording.
And are we ready, Salome?
That we are.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Greg Johnson. I'm the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program Administrator, and I'd like to welcome you to our third Equity Roundtable entitled Accessibility Through Infrastructure. Our panelists today will discuss why accessibility is a critical part of any modern infrastructure project and what that looks like for the Interstate Bridge Program. So most of our panelists today are people who are living with disabilities, who have the real world experience and challenges of trying to access infrastructure with a disability. So today is also in recognition of the International Day of Persons with Disabilities, which falls on December 3rd. This date was proclaimed by the United Nations General Assembly in 1992, so 30 years ago, to promote understanding of disability issues. So we are proud to host this and talk about and raise awareness of the benefits derived from including people with disabilities in every aspect of political, social, economic, and cultural life. So it's fitting that the 2022 International Day of Persons with Disabilities theme is transformative solutions for inclusive development, the role of innovation in fueling an accessible and equitable world. This is also 32 years ago, the Americans with Disability Act was passed through the United States Congress and signed by President George Bush. So we are proud to once again host this event where we are centering equity as part of our program. And it's a fundamental part of the IBR replacement project that we are committed to. So we are pursuing equitable processes to achieve equitable outcomes. So persons with disabilities are well represented in our equity advisory group, which guides us in our processes, as well as informs us on our outcomes. Equity is also infused in our community engagement. We're working hard to meet community members where they are and through virtual and in-person engagement opportunities like these roundtables. In September, we hosted a virtual roundtable discussion with local and national equity leaders in which we discuss why equity matters in transportation infrastructure. Last February, we hosted a roundtable commemorating Black History Month. So this is, once again, our efforts to strive to bring attention to this key critical issue. As our modified locally preferred alternative proceeds through the environmental review process into next summer, we are striving to provide the community members with the tools they need to weigh in on our supplemental draft environmental impact statement in a meaningful way. In early 2023, we will focus on reaching our equity priority communities and providing information that is accessible and easy to understand. We also will partner again with our equity-focused community-based organizations, providing affinity sessions and offering engagement opportunities that allow that critical two-way communications and meet audiences where they are. We will continue to engage with the over 200 community-based organizations or CBOs, many of which are dedicated to serving persons with a range of disabilities. As a society, we can do better when it comes to accessibility. According to the US Census Bureau's 2016 through 2020 American Community Survey, 12% of adults under the age of 65 in the Portland metropolitan area, including Vancouver, live with a disability. That figure rises to 16% in the IBR program area. So a lack of accessibility in the built environment contributes greatly to the marginalization of people with disabilities. Removing barriers means addressing the needs of people with visual, auditory, cognitive, developmental, and physical disabilities. This is why it's so important to engage with persons with disabilities in large infrastructure projects. Removing barrier means improving active transportation, the existing shared use path on the Interstate Bridge, which is not ADA compliant by a long stretch. Removing barriers also means providing reliable transit options for folks who cannot drive. In conclusion, I'd like to reinforce that the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program is focused on improving the experience and travel reliability for all travelers, including persons with disabilities. We look forward to hearing from our panelists today on their thoughts for our program. Once again, welcome to today's roundtable discussion. Thank you.
Hello and good evening, everyone. My name is Salome Chimuku. My pronouns are she, her, and I work here on the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program. I am going to introduce our lovely moderator for this evening. Our moderator for tonight is Emilee Thomas Peralta. She is the equity specialist and analyst on the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program. And Emilee is a public and governmental affairs professional with a wide range of experience in public, private, and nonprofit sectors. She has brought a dedication to this advancement of equity and civil rights to her work, ranging from the office of U.S. Senator Jeff Merkley to a major international advocacy campaign to end family separation at the border. Emilee is also a mom of a very vivacious 12-year-old daughter who is on the autism spectrum. And please welcome Emilee.
Well, thank you, everyone, and good evening. Welcome to the Accessibility Throughout Infrastructure Roundtable discussion. As Salome said, my name is Emilee Thomas Peralta. My pronouns are she and her, and I will be your facilitator tonight. The Interstate Bridge Replacement Program wanted to host this roundtable event to start a dialogue about accessibility and infrastructure in transportation. Today, we have an amazing panel of people who will answer some questions around accessibility in mega projects. So our first panelist is Salome Chimuku, and she is a key part of the community engagement and equity teams on the IBR program. Salome is a first-generation Black disabled woman. She started working in advocacy at the age of 18 and has over a decade of experience with organizing, advocacy, and policy work. Salome uses her lived experience in her role with the IBR program and with espousal strategies. Her role in the program is to incorporate equity tools, tactics, and goals throughout the communications team. Salome attended Willamette University with a focus on political science and German. Next, we have Eileen Collins, the Interim Director of Accessible Transportation Programs at TriMet. Eileen is responsible for the daily management and operations of paratransit services for TriMet Service District, focusing on customer experience, system efficiency, and innovations in the paratransit space. She has a unique 25-plus-year background in public transit, Americans with Disabilities Act compliance, transportation policy, communications, leadership, strategic planning, and team development. Eileen earned her bachelor's from the University of Portland in political science and communications and a master's in public administration at the University of Oregon. Our next panelist is Gabrielle Godin. She has been serving as the executive director of the Oregon Self-Advocacy Coalition for 6 years. She started as a volunteer, then a board member, a peer mentor, and now executive director. And our final panelist is Matt Hines. He is the executive director of Activate Inclusion. Matt is an educator, community organizer, and advocate, and has worked toward the betterment of his community and the advancement of people with disabilities for over 15 years. These efforts include guiding action and policy at the local, state, and federal level to support equity in all spaces of society. In our region, Activate Inclusion has served a strong voice of leadership for people with disabilities through meaningful collaboration with community stakeholders, but more importantly, the connection to individuals and families and their daily needs, as these are the foundations that help make lasting change. So thank you to each of you for joining us tonight. We're very excited to have a great conversation. As a reminder to participants, today we will be seeking to center the voices of equity priority communities, particularly people living with disabilities. There are a few different ways that participants may submit questions for our panelists. For participants in the Zoom room, please use the Q&A feature to submit your question. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you should see it available. You may have to click the More button if you are joined via a mobile device. For those who are watching on live stream, please email your questions to info@interstatebridge.org. And now we will go to our first question of the night, and this is for all of our panelists. So you were asked to pick a quote that motivates or speaks to your work in the equity space. So please share your quote with us and why you chose it. Let's start with you, Salome.
Thanks, Emilee. The quote that I chose for today comes from Malcolm X. It is, I do not believe that hate moves or changes people, but that great love does. And I chose that quote because it is something that I remind myself of what fuels equity work, which is love, and that what sustains people in equity work and advocacy work is love of other people and love of our communities.
Thank you so much, Salome. Let's go to you, Eileen.
Thank you, Emilee. My quote that I've been living by for the past couple of years is, "You have been assigned this mountain to show others that it can be moved." And the context for that is that I am also, like Emilee, the mother of a child on the autism spectrum. And I've been told my son's whole life, he's 22 now, but we were told there were so many things that he wouldn't do and that he couldn't do. And all of those things that they said he wouldn't do and he couldn't do, he's doing now. He's jumping out of airplanes, he's working, he's riding transit on his own. And then I think about the 30 plus years since the ADA was passed and the uphill battle we still fight to get elements of universal design and inclusion and accessibility considered in construction and transit projects in our daily lives. And I think about this quote because I am tenacious and unrelenting, and every time I'm able to collaborate, to communicate, and demonstrate the value of the points I'm trying to make, I see proof that I'm capable of chipping away at that mountain, and it demonstrates to others the power of their voice when used constructively and proactively.
Thank you so much, Eileen. Now let's move over to Matt. Could you please share your quote with us and why you chose it?
Yes, thank you, Emilee, and thank you to everyone who's here. I chose the quote, "Nothing about us without us," and I chose that as a person with a disability because it means so much to me. It reminds me that the fight is never over, that I always must plant myself in the middle of conversations about not only my disability, but about all people with disabilities in everyday life. And nothing about us without us really derives from kind of society's historical exclusion of people being in part of conversations that they should be a part of from day one. And with respect to some of what's already been said, accessibility, inclusivity in society, those things we cannot make inroads in those spaces if we're not a part of the conversation. And so I've always fought to be at the table for not just in my personal life, but also for the people that I support in my community, and to be that voice when there is a conversation to be had about including persons with disabilities in decisions, including persons with disabilities in considering strategy and future planning. And so I think it's really valuable that we keep not just my quote, but all these different quotes at the forefront of what we're talking about, because they all, excuse me, they all represent the lived experience of people with disabilities, and a reflection of the fight that we are in for ourselves and our community.
Thank you so much, Matt. And Gabrielle, you chose the quote, "When the whole world is silent, even one voice becomes powerful." Could you please share why you chose that?
What I really try to do in my job is really think of really supporting other advocates to speak up. And it's just really meaningful to me to hear that quote. It's actually one my advocate brought up to me and who passed away. And it really just always stuck with me because her battle was in the institutions. She had everything and anything from the institutions happen. And she was who actually taught me to advocate. She's the one that stood by me. She's the one that has changed the whole system. She has done a lot. And it meant more to me than just a quote. It reminds me of my friend and the person that came before me and really started fighting. Also, she gave me perspective of how it is to support other people and to make sure their voices are being heard, not just mine. Because every single person deserves to have their voice heard and deserves to be able to express it their own way. I know everybody has a different way of communicating. Sometimes I like to talk with my hands. So excuse me if I do this during this presentation, I move my hands, I move around a little more. That's how I communicate, but someone else might communicate by assistive technology, or they decide to communicate other ways. I apologize, everybody. When you have a 6-month-old puppy, they don't know when you're presenting. And he wants to have his voice heard too. But really, it means more than that to me. I was thinking after I wrote that, why it doesn't sum up enough. It really doesn't, because my friend Ruth, she's taught a lot of people to have a voice for the first time, and she got the institutions closed in Oregon, and she's continued even to the last day. It was a week before she passed away, and she only wanted to make sure people were being heard and how she could help.
Well, thank you, all of you, so much for sharing your quote with us. I think that really sets the table well for this conversation. So let's move into our first question. And a little bit of lead up on this is that the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program has developed an equity framework, which is basically a roadmap for how the program can think about equity and integrate it into every aspect of the program, from the decisions that are made before construction even happens all the way through to the end. And major parts of the equity framework include defining who the equity priority communities are in the program area, the goals and priorities related specifically to equity, and then accountability mechanisms for making sure that the program stays true to its commitment to centering equity throughout the process. So Matt, I'd like to start with you, given your experience with the Equity Advisory Group. Can you please share a bit about how the EAG participated in the development of the equity framework and provided feedback during the process?
Yes, so I am happy to share that the Equity Advisory Group was had a very, very strong voice from the beginning on kind of the expectations and what we would like to see in that framework based off of the bringing together of all of our experiences. And so we started out with a very strong foundation for what we set out to do. And I think what we soon discovered is that we all had the right priorities and the right thought process of equity, but as mentioned here earlier, right, we all have different spaces that we're contributing to for that larger goal. And so I think when you start to bring all these different voices together, it's very powerful, but it also means that there is so much to consider when you look at an equity framework. And I think that in our early experiences on the Equity Advisory Group, we took a lot of care in crafting our language, not just about avoiding past harms, but also building language that really supports our belief in really my quote, which is that nothing about us without us in this process. And just to also share too that even though that was our initial place that we all set out together, that we also soon understood the various speed bumps that projects experience along the way of creating an equity framework, right? That even if everyone understands what is to be done and the goal itself is in front of everyone, that sometimes bringing everybody's thought process forward in that shared goal can be difficult. I remember early conversations about very, very early conversations when I first joined the equity team about ensuring that we had 3D models available for any time a decision would need to be made regarding the accessibility and the infrastructure of the preferred alternative we would choose. And, and that was a conversation that everybody was on board with, and everybody knew was important from day one, from not only the equity group, but also from the internal IVR groups. Everyone was on the same page with that, but nevertheless, it took almost a year for that to come to fruition, even though we understood that was a process that we had to undertake. And I think that is a good example right there of what encapsulates how important it is to consider accessibility from the very beginning, to look around at the table and to see who's at the table when you're first starting out. I think about the conversations I've had with communications, with the environmental team, with the design team in several stages of our equity framework design, and just trying, to help them understand that while yes, these processes make sense, that one, they take time to put into place, two, they take resources to put into place. And so it kind of recalibrates how people really actually see equity and accessibility. And it's not just this general concept, but they start to see all the different decisions and actions that have to be taken along the way internally within IVR, as well as in conjunction with the equity group to make that happen. And so those processes, as time progressed with the equity group, equity advisor group and IVR, became a lot smoother, because different departments did start to think about how important it is to consider accessibility of a particular issue or subject before moving on, and to avoid having to have Matt drag you back into a meeting to explain why we're talking about this after the fact, which is quite common, to be honest, when you undertake these big projects and equity frameworks quite often you're going back and correcting what was already done because voices weren't at the table, people weren't at the table giving valuable insight. And so I'm really proud of the growth that IVR internally has made with that. I know there's still a lot to go, and people have their own journeys that they need to keep going on to really reach true inclusivity in their thought process. But I think we've made a lot of great strides. I think the equity framework reflects that importance of connecting to people where they're at. And I think also the equity framework with respect to reaching out to community-based organizations, I think that there was a lot of continuity there, because I think that the community organizations that IVR reached out to also shared those values and really pushed that accessibility and equity framework forward.
Thank you so much, Matt. And as a follow-up, we're wondering, how do you envision or see the use of equity frameworks in serving to advance disability rights and goals in these kind of projects?
Well, without these different frameworks in place, right, I feel like we may just retreat back to the way that we used to do things, which was that we would, as a society, we would wait for our different stakeholders to come to us and tell us that we've done something wrong. And I think that by taking this approach, by insisting that equity and accessibility are in the foundations of everything that we do, not just now, but going forward, that you're building stronger foundations for people with disabilities in this area, in society. You're giving them the voice, you're getting you're unlocking the gates and allowing them a seat at the table to have conversations that are about them, for them, and for future generations. And I also note back to the statistics that we heard earlier about the prevalence of disability increasing. This is not something that we can ignore. We have to understand that as we progress as a society, more prevalence in disability will be discovered, more need for universal and inclusive design is going to be prevalent across society. And so this example right here that we're talking about of what we've been able to do with IVR and with the Interstate is just an example of how large scale infrastructure can be influenced by persons with disabilities that actually puts forward the priorities for that community for generations to come. And I will just add that one thing that is really great about people with disabilities is that when they think through accessible design, they think through it not just for people with disabilities, but for all people. And when we're talking about mass transit, when we're talking about active transport, when we're talking about getting people moving around and getting people to different places, I think it's really important to have those voices at the table who can envision these things that we don't always think of when we're not connected to people with disabilities, when we're not connected to the stakeholders in a specific subject that we're talking about. So I think it advances the voice of people with disabilities, and that's especially important. And we have to continue that fight even 32 years later. There's the next evolution of where our voice is at the table with these projects, and I think this is just a start. This project is a reflection of the start of that work to come.
Thank you so much, Matt. Those are really great points. And Eileen, I want to take it to you to build off of that. How do you see that smaller or maybe partner agencies could implement something similar to the equity framework to support its goals?
Thanks, Emilee. TriMet is committed to diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in all that we do. And we recognize that historic barriers have prevented some of our most vulnerable community members from being participants in that public process, which is why we strive to create educational and engaging community dialogue that is inclusive of all races, abilities, and identities, ensuring fair access for traditionally underserved communities. So recently, with the help of our riders and system stakeholders, we've introduced new low-income fare, we've decriminalized the system and announced new climate goals. So for more than 2 decades, we've been industry leaders in minority contracting and workforce development. We've also established one of the most comprehensive civil rights Title VI programs in the nation. We have a transit equity advisory committee that we've established, along with our Committee on Accessible Transportation, which was established prior to the passage of the ADA. And through those channels, we ensure that all of the voices of our community are heard, their ideas considered, and appropriate actions are taken. And we've learned that these groups provide essential insight and guidance to our manager and board of directors on issues of equity, access, and inclusion. Without those voices, we can't move forward. And it's possible for anyone to build that. Anyone, if you're committed to having that kind of voice heard, that kind of inclusion in your process, can do the same thing. Smaller agencies or partner agencies can implement similar avenues for input and feedback by looking to their customers. 1 out of 4 people in the US will experience disability at some point in their life, whether it's a broken leg while playing basketball or a car accident or something more profound. So this could impact any one of us at any given point. And so just like Matt was saying, looking at universal design principles, a ramp allows anyone to get into an area. It allows a mom with kids in strollers. It allows a young, healthy 24-year-old man who broke his leg playing basketball and is on crutches. And it also accounts for people who might be mobility device users to gain access. So the people are out there who want to provide this input. If you care, you will ask them and they will come. So it's not hard to find representation for the community if you're willing to look around. If you build those avenues for access and input, those folks will come. So I think if you start by looking to your customers, looking to your employees, looking to the people that you serve, if you care about their input, you ask them for it. So that not only ensures process equity, but then when you implement it, you get outcome equity. And you have to be committed to both pieces of that equation. And that's what we've been doing at TriMet, and it's working really well for us.
Thank you so much, Eileen. That ties in very well to the IBR programs, the equity framework. The process and outcome equity are a key aspect of the equity framework and the way that the program thinks about how to integrate equity into every aspect of the program and all of its decisions. And thank you both so much. Let's move to our next question. And this is for Salome and Gabrielle. So Salome, let's start with you. what are some approaches, lessons learned, or things you would like to see projects use in their outreach efforts to disability advocacy organizations and the people they serve?
That's a great question, Emilee. I think that one of the things that comes first to mind is an obvious one, which builds upon Matt's quote about nothing about us without us, and making sure that whatever sort of outreach or implementation that you're trying to do incorporates people living with a disability from the very beginning. I think oftentimes it's really easy to get worried around how we will pay for this, worried about the different elements in which making things accessible can take and require if you haven't been practicing it already. But one of the benefits of taking that step in that first leaf is it becomes normalized. It becomes a part of your everyday function. One of the things that I think about is that when coming onto the program, we made the commitment through our Title VI, which is our language accessibility for people with limited English proficiency. We talked about how language is really important. And if language is really important to us to make sure people can understand what it is we're talking about, that fueled our desire and our requirement to have closed captioning at all events and anything in which we're asking for feedback from the public. It also tied into, well, if we're going to have closed captioning, we need to also have ASL interpreters. And because of the fact that we started out with that drive, that decision, and decided that we wanted to make this as accessible as possible, it made it a lot easier for other people to access our meetings. Just like Matt said, when you build something for one person to be accessible, you're actually helping a lot more people than just that one person. I know that the first time that I got to work with Matt on the program, we talked about screen readers and making it apparent to my colleagues and other employees on the project that when we're making things remediated and screen reader accessible, we're not just making it accessible for Matt, who is blind, and other folks who are blind. It's also making it accessible for all types of people that use screen readers, myself included. And so we, I would say, to answer your question again, is it's really about normalizing these accessibility features, normalizing the technology to make ourselves more accessible, and creating a new norm and a new platform for which we're standing on in terms of our engagement work and outreach work. I think another thing projects should really keep in mind in terms of lessons learned is that these features and doing things correctly takes time. It just simply takes the time to really make that effort. And we can't just continue to try to center accessibility, but treat it as an afterthought in terms of like the last minute we're trying to figure out something around accessibility. It should have been something we start from the beginning. Because as Matt said, although we all have the desire to have 3D models on the program, because of the bureaucracies, because of the things in place, and that historically these things were not accessible, it took us a long time to get those things stood up and available. And so just making sure that you give yourself the time to really do equity work in the way that it needs to be done. But I'll pass it over to Gabrielle to add to that.
Emilee, can you repeat the question for me?
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some approaches that you would like to see projects take in their outreach efforts to disability advocacy organizations and the people that they serve?
Really research what the different community that you are really trying to get into, how they communicate, how they want to get along, how do they want you to talk to them? Because really it's about like the same thing as Matt says, nothing about us without us. How are you supposed to know which community you're going into if you don't do research and take the time like you would your coworker, like another company you're working with, to build your products or whatever you're trying to connect with them about? Really just looking into that. Coming to organizations like ours is actually a huge start to that as well, because each of our organizations does something different, but at the same time it doesn't. And so really like looking at each community, each location, how are they going to really get you in? How can you help them as much as they help you? Because really they don't want just someone coming in and asking them of something. They're like, hey, you can come in and kind of offer something as well. A community, a potential, you're like, I'm curious about getting jobs, having people get jobs at my company. How do I go about this? And so it's giving back to their community, and it's giving as well as taking. And so that really makes it so it's not them feeling like people are just coming to them for something they want. I definitely know with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, really, it's really hard at times to come in because we have a variety of disabilities. I have an intellectual and developmental disability. So I might communicate differently than one of the advocates that come through my organization. And by coming to me or even going to them and saying, hey, how do you best communicate? Is it internet? Is it email? Is it Facebook Messenger, phone numbers, text? Really kind of engaging with what the community is really looking for and how the different people adapt to it. It's going to really get you into the intellectual and developmental disability, and also bringing an accessible way of explaining things to us is going to really help you do that. Because if we don't know, we don't know. And so we can't give you the answers you really need. And we want to be able to help and be part of that. And so giving us an accessible way of understanding really could help us to help you, and also give us knowledge so we learn.
And I would say that I've had the pleasure of talking with Gabrielle a bit leading up to this. And one of the things that she said to me that just stood out even some more right now is just being aware that mistakes will be made. There's going to be times where you just don't get it right because that's not your lived experience. And that is okay. Making a mistake or the fear of making a mistake shouldn't stop you from trying. Because I think that that's essentially what needs to happen, is people trying and wanting for things to be different, for things to become different.
And also remember, we're not going to judge you. Don't judge us. And we're not going to judge you about coming to us and asking that, or even making a mistake. We would rather you not be afraid, because people with intellectual and developmental disability, people are afraid to talk to us because they don't know how to do it. They're afraid of not explaining and everything like that. Give us the opportunity to tell you how we need you to. And also show us it's okay to make a mistake, because a lot of times we get beat down about our mistakes instead of realization everyone falls sometimes.
Great. Thank you both so much. I feel that you both raised some really great points about meeting people where they're at, which is such a key part to equitable engagement. So thank you both so much for sharing your experiences so far. I'd like to move us over to the next question, and these are for Eileen and Salome. So Eileen, we will start with you. You touched on this a little bit in your answer earlier, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about how the IBR project's centering of equity impacts TriMet's goals around accessibility, or the lens through which TriMet looks at the IBR program and its partnership.
Thanks, Emilee. So I'm not sure that the IBR's centering of equity differs from TriMet's. I think they complement each other. TriMet really focuses heavily through an equity lens perspective in evaluating, doing a 10-factor analysis when we are going to propose service changes, service impacts, to ensure that we are implementing policies and programs that result in equitable outcomes for all communities. One of our primary goals in the equity lens is to increase access to mobility. And we do that by evaluating the affordability, accessibility, efficiency, reliability, and safety of our systems. In that 10-factor analysis, that process, we use it to ensure that not only process equity, again, but outcome equity. Then this is the foundation upon which we build all of our service. This equity lens was developed in partnership with our Transit Equity Advisory Committee, and it aids in planning our service investments, The index scoring regimen includes measures of low-income populations, as well as defined and summarized by individual census block groups, as well as communities of color, limited English proficiency communities, youth populations, limited vehicle access, affordable housing units, older adults, people with disabilities, low and medium wage jobs, and key retail, human, and social service agencies. These factors are normalized, scored, and integrated into the index and identify locations of high concentrations of equity communities in the Tri-County region. So that's how we plan our service. We want to make sure that where we're putting service, because we understand that transportation equals independence. Independence equals freedom. And when we can make sure that people have access to that independence and freedom, they can live their lives fully. And transportation is a social determinant of health. And we want to be a key player in that, not just a transit provider, but a mobility manager, and making sure that we're finding the most proactive, efficient, inclusive, accessible ways to keep people living healthy in their homes, living healthy where they choose to live. I've done a lot of work with older adults who also experience disability. And transportation tends to be that last remaining factor that keeps people living in their homes or having to move into supported living environments. And if we can do our job right in transportation, and someone who otherwise could live healthily at home but can't get to a doctor's appointment, if we can get them connected to that doctor's appointment so that they can age in place, and that's better for them, then that's our role as a community partner to ensure that we can do that. And I believe that what we're all trying to do with TriMet service, with the Interstate Bridge Replacement, is to keep people connected, to make sure that someone's not going to have a barrier to get to a veteran's mental health appointment in Vancouver when they live in Portland, but they can't get across the bridge. So if we can make sure that we're planning and coordinating together with those universal design principles in mind, then we keep all of those impacted communities who are more likely to be transit dependent connected to the services that they need. And so keeping that lens infused into every decision that we make at TriMet is really at the forefront of all of our planning, whether it's in my accessible transportation program or in fixed route service planning. This is what we all live with. It's what we all embrace. We know the importance of it.
Thank you so much, Eileen. It sounds like TriMet's doing a lot of really great work in this space, and I appreciate you mentioning the different methodologies that TriMet uses to assess equity, particularly the equity index. It's a really great parallel to a lot of the work that the Interstate Bridge Replacement program has been doing as well. A lot of the similar analyses, things such as how different options may affect access to jobs for different equity priority communities. So that really takes me over into the next question that Salome, I was hoping you could get us started with, and just explain a little bit about what is a locally preferred alternative, or the LPA that we've mentioned here a couple times, and maybe touch a bit on the accessibility considerations that have kind of shaped this process.
So, as you can see, there are different ways in which we can center equity. I just did one, which was pause to let the interpreters switch out and make sure that our folks watching that rely on ASL are getting all the words that are being said. Not that my words are much better. I'll try to make it shiny. So I would say that the way to think about the locally preferred option is to think about it as pillars in which we are saying these are some key components that deserve researched and deserve time being spent doing data analysis on these key elements. Right now, the IBR project does have a modified locally preferred alternative that is available on the website for folks to interact with via an open house. There are some key elements that come into play for this, that because we centered equity, we came at answering some of these questions differently in the way that we did analysis work. So right now, like I said, the locally preferred alternative is on the website for folks to view. But as we came to building this, we thought about what are some considerations around the way in which people move throughout the corridor that we should take into consideration. And when it came specifically to talking about and working with folks living with a disability, it came into play of like, where do people live? what are the types of people within the program area or the surrounding project area? And how do they move about the corridor? A lot of that was done via listening sessions and community briefings in which we went and sought out people's feedback and opinion about how they use their bridge and the relationship to the bridge. The second piece of that was doing affinity sessions within those listening sessions. So we understood that because of barriers and historical treatment and trauma that folks might have experienced through trying to engage in public settings, we decided to have affinity sessions so people felt more comfortable vocalizing their perspective and their views. This came to fruition through us doing these events on our own at first, but then it turned into partnerships. And thankfully, through things such as our miniature grant program, we were able to work with Matt over at Activate Inclusion to not only help us with facilitating a conversation about the bridge and updates that was focused on people living with a disability and was just people living with a disability in that session, but we also worked with Activate Inclusion to talk about software, such as what kind of things we're using for our surveys to make sure they were accessible. And through that, we were able to get the feedback we needed to really shape what we ended up with the modified locally preferred alternative, or the LPA. And some of that came into conversations around what kind of transit even do we want to have in certain areas. And as Eileen mentioned, talking about, does this make more jobs accessible to more people? And as you can guess and imagine, as we focus on the centering of equity, the increase in access to jobs went up for all different populations, regardless of those living with a disability or not. And we also found that with this access to transportation, it also widens people's ability in terms of how far they can travel for social events. It's not just about getting to and from work. Sometimes it's getting to and from church, getting to and from parks, getting to and from schools, especially since Vancouver has the School for the Deaf and the School for the Blind. We have other features here on the Oregon side as well that are now more accessible with this LPA to folks on the Vancouver side. And as we all know, our communities are moving, they're changing. And due to COVID, we've also had to adapt to our community being virtual as well as in person. But we wanted to make sure that with the locally preferred alternative, as we did research and analysis, where we were incorporating people's whole lives and not just to and from work or to and from where they currently go, but more about the great idea about the to and from where they would like to go if it was available to them.
Great. Thank you so much, Salome. And I think that leads us well into our next question. You've talked some of the ways that the IBR program in particular has approached this, but I'd love to hear from Matt, Gabrielle, and Salome. As people who live with a disability, what do projects need to keep in mind when striving to be accessible? And Salome, or actually, let's start with Matt, since Salome was just going.
Salome was on a roll. I think we should stick with Salome. Yeah, I was actually thinking about what was being shared, and one thing that I wanted to be sure to highlight, which I think is really important when we talk about accessibility and centering equity, is that in this project with IBR and the conversations between Activate Inclusion and IBR and the different staff, you know, it wasn't just about leveraging voices to educate what we're doing, to educate our decisions, right? From the get-go in our equity framework, we also talked about elevating our historically marginalized groups into areas that they've not been before, which comes to my point in talking about not just taking feedback and information from our community of persons with disabilities, but bringing forth opportunities for them to be at the table and to monetize their expertise, to monetize their experience, and to improve to improve job access for people with disabilities. Because I think when people think infrastructure projects, when people think transportation projects, right, like they don't see jobs, they don't see the different sectors of jobs and potentials that pop up in that instance. What they see is gathering that feedback from that community, we hope, right? And that's the right step to make. But it's also an important step to to remember that through the entire lives of our persons with disability community, that this information has been extracted and used without any sort of ability to bring people with disabilities forward, and so that they can enjoy in the success of these programs, so that they can benefit financially from their experiences. And so I was really happy to see that when it came down to IBR needing Activate Inclusion's expertise on like something, for example, like preparing the survey, that it wasn't just about bringing people with disabilities in to give their expertise about that survey, but it was bringing people with disabilities to the table and paying them to give their expertise about how to set up these different processes, how to set up these different software that Salome was talking about, so that we can put this information out into the community and to get good information back. And so I just wanted to share that I think it's important really to think about not just having people with disabilities at the table, but making them a part of the team, making them helping to let them share in the success of the program, not just in its not just in what it does, but also with how it can benefit their lives and the lives of other people with disabilities. And so that's kind of one thing I wanted to share that I really appreciated about this project.
Thanks so much, Matt. I think that really speaks a lot to the importance of process equity. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Gabrielle, I'd love to get your thoughts. What do projects need to keep in mind when striving to be accessible?
There are actually multiple things. Here in Oregon, especially, we have something called job coaches. So really looking at that and seeing what resources that person has and communicating with them on those resources to make it equitable. Maybe they have supports that can help you understand the disability better and kind of start getting to know the community. Really just looking at and getting to know them and really finding other allies like these groups. Like I'm trying to put together, I'm missing a word. I do have a memory due to disability. So really finding communities like ours that will come together, that will help you, that will really help you engage with the different people that we work with. So really coming together and do that to make a process, a program or process successful. It's a lot of trial and error, honestly. And so really saying, oh, I messed up, or going back to a group here and asking what you could do different, what are you missing? That's really important to do because that's how you learn. With OSAC, how we make our projects on our communication successful is by continuously doing that. Continuously coming back, because there's always something that can be learned from each other, and not just you, but also the community too. If given that option, they would definitely do that. And so to make it successful, it's finding communities, but also here in Oregon, we have Nike is actually starting one of those in programs, as well as to create jobs for people with disabilities, as well as one of their key people through another program. And so really engaging with different programs that have already been started that are similar to what you're doing or wanting to do, becoming an ally, trying to understand, and really working with each other will make both sides very successful.
Thank you so much, Gabrielle. And Salome, let's take it over to you. Do you have anything to add on what projects can do to keep or what they should keep in mind when striving to be accessible?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that projects should definitely keep in mind is that folks living with a disability have learned to be resilient. And I say that because we definitely are talking about having folks come to the table, having folks participate, but a piece of that is understanding that the person next to you might take different things to get to that very same table, and being appreciative of the journey they took to get there. I know that one of the things that I think about consistently is it's so easy to just say, well, it's working, right? it's like we're doing enough to because they're here, right? And that may not be the case. It could be that they're there because of their own tenacity and the fact that they got there despite things not being accessible. And so I would say that, like, you know, just keeping that in mind, that this community is resilient and they've learned how to be self-sufficient because no one else has been doing it for them. And to just really appreciate that in a internalizing concept, that because of their resilience, they've also been taught not to ask for things. They've been taught not to center themselves or their needs. And they've been told that they had to accommodate what was happening and not necessarily that they could change it. And so we should really keep that in mind, that as we're outreaching to these communities, we have to consistently be asking, how can we do better? What could be better? And then be willing to do those things, because just because they're there doesn't mean that something was accessible. It could just be that their own skill set and their own tenacity got them there. And just keep reevaluating and keep looking back on how we can make things easier, better, run smoother. And also teach others in the space how to be accessible and accommodating. Oftentimes, people forget that just because you make something accessible doesn't mean that another person can't come in and accidentally do something that makes the room inaccessible again. So allowing for yourself to educate others on, we are doing things this way because to accommodate for folks who need these accommodations. And so honestly speaking, just being that reminder, being that person in the room that just goes, hey, the ASL interpreters are catching up, let's wait a second. Or to be like, hey, there's a reason why we're pausing in between each slide. It's to allow folks who are using screen readers to make sure that they have gone through the entire passage before we move on. Or, hey, there's a reason why we're asking for silence. It's so that folks who are dealing with sensory inputs have the ability to process. And so just making sure that folks who are of the community aren't the only ones advocating in the space for accessibility, but joining with them in advocating for accessibility.
Great, thank you so much. And before we move to our audience questions, just want to give the opportunity for any additional thoughts here.
I really do. The thing is that sometimes when we consider accessibility, everybody could use it. Could everyone have a chance to actually look at that PowerPoint right there and maybe take a picture? Maybe they're having a hard day or a hard month. It's really going back and like looking at that. And that's what I'm saying about people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, just that. It's how can you make accessible for everyone, but not at the same time, because so many people can use accessibilities, like different technology. Sometimes you were in a house during the pandemic with a tiny toddler. That was me, my old roommate. And with that, you could really use that writing on that screen to focus because you're having trouble hearing, or there's distracting noises coming from the house. And it's really adaptation to everyone. Hey, can we stop for a second so people have a chance to catch up? Hey, can we have it more quiet? So people can focus better, because we all have things going on in our life. So making it accessibility, but not accessibility, and making it just a basic guidelines for your community, for your company, your organization. Just make it basic for across the board, because I find with my advocates, I try not, the people I support and the ones I meet, I try not making it out, like them feel what they call outed. And by doing that for everyone, that person that doesn't want to, know they have trouble hearing and need that writing, they don't want everyone to know. So that gives them what they need as a person with a disability without feeling that way. Or some people need just a little bit, somebody to ask questions to. There are different ways to do it. Accessibility doesn't have to be just one box. We are many things, and we all, as people with disabilities or not, could use a little bit of technology at any given point in our life, including our phones. Everyone has a phone, and we do like speech to text and the internet. I know a lot of people without disabilities that don't know how to spell like I don't.
I definitely have a love-hate relationship with speech to text because it doesn't know how to spell my name. So, but I do love using it, and it has been helpful for moments I can't look at screens anymore due to my disability. So I definitely agree with those sentiments.
Great, thank you all so much. Now I'd like to move to our audience questions, and I'd like to give a quick reminder that if you would like to submit a question for our panelists and you are in the Zoom room, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And for those watching via live stream, please email your question to info@interstatebridge.org. So now it looks like we have a couple of questions. The first one is, what are some examples of difficulties you have faced with infrastructure because they were not fully accessible? And I will open the floor up to anyone who would like to chime in here.
This is Matt. I'd be happy to jump in here. So, I mean, as somebody with a sensory disability, this is something that I encounter quite a bit, right? Because I rely on the physical space to be able to use the physical space to navigate where I'm going, right? So there are times in the physical space where a lack of accessibility really hurts. Not having distinguished sidewalks from down curves when traveling on streets, not having crosswalks that make audio signals when it's my time to cross, not having updated Braille signage, even things like poor design where you're putting light poles or other, fancy looking things in the middle of walking spaces, or taking people through a figure eight through a park, when they're walking, to disorient instead of having more straight line type of pedestrian walking. And so, like, there's a whole slew of experiences, but essentially what it does is it impedes your ability for freedom of navigation, right? Or it impedes your ability to access vital information at any given moment. So when we look at the different shortfalls in accessibility in physical spaces and artificial spaces like bureaucracy, right? Those are things that can impact immediately the experience of somebody with a disability. And we have enough experiences in our everyday lives that we have to cut through and fight through. And so in those moments, we really, really just desire that accessibility. We crave that accessibility. We say to ourselves, gee, in 20 years, I hope we don't have the same issue. I hope that people think about these things, in the next generation when they're designing the world, the next version of all the world's infrastructure. So those are things that come to me.
Thanks so much, Matt. Does anyone else have any thoughts they'd like to share on this?
I would add from a transit access standpoint, one of the biggest challenges our riders have who are trying to use fixed route, whether it's light rail or a bus, are elevators. Elevators at platforms that I think with great intention, people thought elevators would be the most accessible path to get people from a lower level of a max station, for example, up to the street level. But when the elevators go out, which they do a lot, and then you have supply chain shortages during COVID, so we can't get the parts on time, then we either have people who can't get off at that stop to get to their home that's right above the stop, or they can't get to work. So finding a universal design that provides, switchbacks and ramps that is not only good for people in mobility devices, again, but moms with strollers, people with grocery carts, that they're better for everyone. That switchbacks and ramps mean that people with bikes can get up and down, and they don't go out. They're always there. So that's a big topic for TriMet right now that we're looking at.
I know that, at least in my personal experience, I think one of the harder parts about transit not being accessible is that people who are also accessing transit may not know that they are becoming a barrier for someone else to access transit. One instance that I can think about is when I first got my service animal, I was commuting quite a bit from my apartment into downtown Portland for work. And the first few instances where I had to get on transit with him became longer rides due to folks just not being educated on what a service animal is. And that, quite honestly, that there are folks out there with invisible disabilities. We can oftentimes see a person and assume that they are able-bodied, that they should be able to just do anything and everything. And it really disrupts our thinking when we are reminded of invisible disabilities, and that there are times in which someone, especially those who might be living with lupus as an example, could be walking around one day just fine, and the next day you see them with a cane. And being more open and accepting of that as opposed to being skeptical. I think that oftentimes when we think about people living with disability, we forget that people living with a disability have a whole host of other identities that they can have, such as being a person of color, such as being low income, a woman, young. It doesn't, disability does not discriminate, funnily enough, and it can be found in every way, shape, form, and size, and just being aware of that. And so back to my personal experience, I found myself having to essentially out myself and be way more open with healthcare and private related matters to prove to people that I was a person living with a disability and that I wasn't just someone trying to get a pet onto the bus or onto the transit. And which was really difficult for some people because they were accustomed to seeing me all the time without one. And so in their brain, this just poof appeared all of a sudden. And as opposed to asking for ways they can help, they turn to asking if this is legitimate. And so those are other ways in why we really emphasize being able to and willing to teach others, because folks just need to be educated, and no more often than not.
I agree. The service dog, we were talking about service dogs, and the thing is, a lot of people don't understand. They don't see you with they don't see your disability. I have physical issues, and I am my little guy is retired now due to medical, and so I got another one that's being trained. People are going to randomly just see a dog pop up with me too. And so really helping people understand, or having to over explain yourself when people don't truly understand or see the disability. They don't see the physical pain. They don't see the reason I need it is many reasons. And so they can't see those reasons though. It's not that easy. OSAC has always been very, very welcoming to my service dogs. They didn't question, but most society doesn't understand that. Also, when the barriers, something to really consider is education and understanding on service dogs, because people come up and grab our service dogs. They just like, hey, buddy. And it's like, no, he's working. He's not your pet. I don't care what you say. Like, even with the words on, people just don't register. So educating the community is very, very crucial to really getting it so everyone understands. I've had my dog, my old service dog, actually pulled away from me by children. So really educating all different ages, all backgrounds, everything. It's really important. I find that I had to give up TriMet because my physical issues, when I was living in Portland, my physical issues got too bad. I couldn't physically do it anymore. And it wasn't because TriMet didn't do it, but it was location. I just couldn't handle locations anymore, sitting for a long time on TriMet lift or the basic thing. It was just too long of waits. And so really making sure that everything's more accessible in that sense, like understanding that there are hidden disabilities or everyone's going to be different, and how can we truly adjust to that and make it so everybody can be fully part of their communities on their level versus what other people experience. I ended up getting a driver's license in a car just because I would have somewhere safe to sit. You know, I get fatigued. I can sit as long as I want. I have my extra water and sugar because my sugar drops. I'm able to have my meds, but it would have been nice. And even up to this point where I live, there's not enough accessibility. And on my block, and not until recently, they actually put those ramps in, which made it so my ex-roommate felt safe to go for a walk with her daughter. So really making our communities, our areas accessible. And buildings. We have a lot of work to do with buildings.
Thank you so much to each of you, and particularly Salome and Gabrielle. Thank you so much for bringing up, the issue of or the topic of invisible disabilities. And I can appreciate that with my experience with my kiddo on the spectrum. There like both of you highlighted, there are many considerations that might not think of, but things like sound and the type of lighting and how enclosed the space is for a waiting area or public spaces. It can make all the difference in her experience in public. And I know for many people it can discourage them from feeling like they can be in those spaces. And so thank you both so much for highlighting that piece in particular. So I would like to move to our next audience question. And this is for any of you, any and all. What do you see equity looking like, or how do you envision equity looking for the IBR program for persons with disabilities once it's completed? Do you have any examples or anything that you would really like to see?
I can go first. I would say that since the whole purpose of the IBR program is to replace the Interstate Bridge that connects Portland and Vancouver, one of the things that I would consider it a success is if people feel that it's an option. I've talked to a lot of people, especially doing the community engagement work here on the project, who, and myself included, who feel like going across the bridge is not a part of their life because it simply isn't an option. And so I think that if we can make people consider this route as an option, as a means to get from either side of the bridge, then that will be a success in my opinion, especially if it's folks who are part of the equity priority communities. If they feel like there's more options now to get to and from Vancouver, that would be something I'd consider a success, because I've definitely heard a lot of stories of people talking about not being able to get to grocery stores, but also people just even ending friendships or relationships because they couldn't get across the bridge in a way that was accessible. And so I think if those folks are, I guess, not to make too light of the situation, willing to date again across the other side of the river, or move across to the other side of the river, or travel to the other side of the river, that'll be a success.
I find that I definitely agree with that. Like, people have had to do that, but they haven't been able to see friends and family either. They're losing their community. The second you become disabled, a lot of things are taken away from you. And if we can make this a success, it'll be one less thing that people are having to give up. Also, there's transit over there on the other side that they could go see that family member and stay with them and go on vacation. There is possibilities back. Also, and I can't have it because I'm gluten-free, but there's supposed to be a really good milkshake place that's really extremely fancy that would be fun to go to for somebody. And how can they have that experience and go do that? And a lot of times also, when you have two people that are dating that have disabilities, no one drives, they can't go to those fireworks, they can't go to try that new place, even though it's right across the river. It's just right there. You can see it. So giving them accessibility and chances to go take their kids to go do that fun thing and having family time and giving them a new experiences. It's so many things. It's just getting back your community basically and having a chance. But also, you want to say loud thing, you might end up finding after the bridge thing is done that you can find someone and actually feel comfortable because you can actually visit them.
Great, thank you so much. Matt and Eileen, is there anything you would like to share in terms of how you envision equity looking for persons with disabilities for the bridge once it's completed, or how you would see success in that area?
Yeah. So this is Matt. I'd be happy to jump in on that. So I would say that where I hope this continued success leads to, I should say, is that we continue to onboard more people with disabilities into this project and future projects as those assets of expertise to help us with what we do. And also to not only take that expertise and to mobilize it, but also to raise that community up by giving them those job opportunities that we all don't seem to always think are available. So just to touch back on that, but also, we know that with this locally preferred option, with this locally preferred alternative, that we're not solving all of the transportation issues of the area, but we are solving a lot of them, and we are bringing this area into a good place for the next 20 to 50 years in our region. But as Salome said, like what really tells me if we succeeded in this process is if people can use this bridge. And I'm going to be honest, I'm at this point one of those people who still have to struggle to even use this bridge to get over to Portland. This option solves a lot for people moving back and forth between North Portland and Southwest Vancouver, but it doesn't do really a lot for all of us connected into the other parts of the surrounding area. So what will show me if we've made progress in this project is if we are looking at ways to mitigate the people that this choice impacts, right? That we are helping people understand why this choice for this alternative was made, and to show people that we're working with TriMet and we're working with C-Tran, that we understand that it isn't making as many connections as we hope, but we're also taking measures after the fact to avoid harm of the people that it's leaving out. And so I think that's what's also going to be informational and instructive to me, is to see how the program is going to address some of the gaps that its decisions, even its decisions now, are making by choosing this alternative. And so that to me is to see that we have identified those gaps with this decision that we're making, and that we're putting things in place to support those people. That will show me that we've made a true impact.
And I would add to that, I hope that this becomes a model, that we see the success of this process in the use by people who experience disability or who are underrepresented and marginalized. We see people maintaining those connections to their communities and exploring across the river together, and that through this conversation and showing people what they didn't know before and expanding their own lens, that they can start to ask some of these questions, whether it's a small scale project or a larger scale project like a bridge replacement, that there is a place for this conversation in all of the projects that we do. And a lot of people didn't know what they didn't know before this. Now they know. So as Maya Angelou said, when you know better, do better. So let's take what we know and do better from this point forward.
Thank you so much, Eileen. I feel like those are really, really great words for us to conclude our audience question section on. So I just want to thank you all again, all of our panelists, for joining us for this really important discussion. For those watching, thank you for spending time with us tonight. If we did not get to your question, please email us at info@interstatebridge.org. We will follow up with you and try to get an answer to your question. This recording will also be available on our website and our YouTube channel soon. For more information on the modified LPA, the equity framework, or our equity advisory group, please visit our website at www.interstatebridge.org. You may also stay in touch with the program through our newsletter and social media. We at the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program wish you and your families a warm holiday season, and I hope to see you again at future events. Thank you all so much.